Is it about justice or politics? In the same breath, the chief prosecutor at the International Criminal Court requesting arrest warrants against Israel's Binyamin Netanyahu and Hamas's Yahya Sinwar. We'll ask about the alleged war crimes, the measure of the request, and the equation. Also, the sharp reactions with the U.S. president, who brands as outrageous the accusations against Prime Minister Netanyahu and his defense chief Yoav Gallant, the likes of the U.K., Italy, and Germany, which, quote, bemoans the inaccurate impression of an equivalence between both sides. And then there's France, among those which says it leaves the matter to the independent view of the judges of the ICC, an international court with jurisdiction in 124 nations. The ICC has indicted sitting leaders before, see Vladimir Putin just a year ago, but never a democratically elected one. What impact on Israel's reputation, on its politics, and will these charges alleviate the suffering in Gaza? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking, will Binyamin Netanyahu be PM non grata? With us, he advised international tribunals on Rwanda, Sierra Leone, and Lebanon. Attorney Yohan Soufi headed the legal department at the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA. Today, you are the director for the Institute for International and Legal and Advocacy. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
With us as well, international attorney William Julien. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Editor-in-chief of the French news website Causeur, Gil Mehaly. How are you?
Great.
And joining us from London, Nomi Bar Yaakov, Associate Fellow at the Chatham House think tank. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me, Francois.
Your reactions on the hashtag F24 debate. It looks a little like damage control time. Israel says it's dispatching its foreign minister to Paris. France, the nation that's home to Europe's largest Jewish and Muslim population, backing the independence of the International Criminal Court in the wake of its Monday bombshell announcement. Antonia Kerrigan has more.
As Israel's Prime Minister and Defense Minister find themselves in the International Criminal Court's sights for war crimes and crimes against humanity, their number one international ally has leapt to their defense.
Let me be clear. We reject the ICC's application for arrest warrants against Israeli leaders. And it's clear Israel wants to do all it can to ensure civilian protection.
Israel and the US are conspicuous by their absence in the list of 124 countries recognizing the authority of the ICC, unlike the vast majority of their European allies. So the latest move by the court tests European loyalty to a court that has up until now prosecuted overwhelmingly African leaders and never yet officials from a Western-aligned democracy.
The International Criminal Court, in over 20 years of existence, has never indicted a Western official. In fact, no international tribunal since Nuremberg has done so.
Despite ICC membership, the UK Prime Minister's loyalty to Israel appears to come first.
Well, this is a deeply unhelpful development. Of course, it's still subject to a final decision, but it remains deeply unhelpful nonetheless.
While France, on the other hand, has come out in support of the court's pursuit of accountability.
For several months, France has been sounding the alarm on the imperative need for a strict respect of international humanitarian law, especially regarding the unacceptable nature of civilian losses in the Gaza Strip and insufficient humanitarian access. France supports the International Criminal Court, its independence, and the fight against impunity in all situations.
It is now up to a panel of 3 judges to assess whether or not to issue the warrants. And if they do, international law will require any ICC member state to arrest the 2 men if they enter their territories. A state of affairs likely to further isolate Israel and its leadership.
Yohan Soufi, by the way, the French foreign minister, he too, by the way, denounces the fact that there is this sort of equivocacy almost in announcing these both charges at the same time. But as you saw in that statement, they do point out that there are alleged war crimes that need to be investigated. So is the problem with pointing the finger at Israel or pointing the finger at Israel on the same day as Hamas?
I think the only instrument that should be applied here is the law and the Rome Statute. Both parties are accused of distinct international crimes, both for war crimes and crimes against humanity, but very distinct facts and crimes. So I don't think there is any equivalency. And, you know, my only compass are the victims. And so, yes, there is an equivalency between an Israeli victim and a Palestinian victim, and that's the only thing that matters.
William Julier?
Yeah, I didn't relate too much to, I think it was just a statement by the German authorities pointing that maybe there was something awkward about announcing the warrants at the same time.
That it offers, quote, the inaccurate impression of an equivalence.
Yeah, I agree with what Juan just said. There's no equivalence. If they had announced on one day for Hamas and on the other day for Israel, on one side people would have said, oh, why first and then second? Warrants, requests for the issuance of warrants are made case by case. It's not Hamas, Israel, or this guy, this other guy, or the PM. That each individual who is targeted is individual because the prosecutor considers that he's got a case sufficient at this stage to request the application, to file in the application to the pretrial chamber that an arrest warrant is confirmed. And that's it. There's no equivalence. It's just that they issued, and I don't see any issue in the fact that it was announced at the same time.
Gil Mihaly, we heard the clip of the British Prime Minister. He labels these requests for arrest warrants as unhelpful. What do you make of that?
Because they are signatories to this criminal court, so he can't reject the legitimacy of the court, especially when they rejoiced a year ago when this court decided to indict Putin. So if you want to say at the same time, I'm for this international instance, but I'm against the decision, you find this kind of formulas. Everyone, because except a minority of specialists in law, all the rest are hearing other things. They are in the political world. They hear messages. They don't know the exact definition of words. Many people think that Netanyahu and the other were already indicted. For many people, it's a done deal. They don't know that there are 3 judges that need to decide.
So the use of this word unhelpful, and you hear it twice in that clip.
Yes.
Is that a political?
Yes, it's probably the most negative thing that he can say about this court without saying, why are we paying for that? Why are we a member of it? He wants to have both sides. Usually, this is a politician's work. You need to have 2 contradictory things at the same time. But what he said is almost as strong as what the Americans said, and the Americans are not signatories to this court. They are not part of the... But if I can, I just wanted to say something about... it's not the legal side, it's the context. Mr. Soufi said that he welcomes this decision because victims are equal. Actually, they are not. It's very important to know why someone was killed or injured. If there is intent, it's grave. If it's an accident, we are in a different story.
Is it still an accident after 7 months?
The question is whether an Israeli military killed someone who is not part of Hamas with the only intent to kill an innocent person, or did he take a decision to kill someone who is a legitimate target, and in consequence of his decision, innocent victims paid with their life, with their property, or with their health. Generally speaking, and I'm sure that in a war that lasted 7 months with maybe 50, 60, 70,000 Israelis that took part in it, there were certainly things that shouldn't have been done. Maybe some of them are criminal acts. But Israel is exercising its right to self-defense, and generally speaking, innocent people are not the object, not the target. Contrary to almost every single act of Hamas. Because when Hamas is firing a rocket, which is a very imprecise weapon, to a civilian area, what are they expected to happen? Israel very, 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 very rarely does that.
All right, I'm going to give Yohann Soufi a chance to respond, but first I want to ask you, Nomi Bar Yaakov, do you agree with Gil on this?
I differ slightly from Gil. I think one has to look at the precise counts that have been issued. The requests for the arrest warrants have been made, and they're different for Hamas, and they're different for Israel, and for the two Israeli, for Prime Minister Binyamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. And I think it is very important to note, A, that there are different counts upon which they're indicting them, and B, that the investigations are ongoing. And I think it's very important to notice that an indictment has not been sought for genocide on either side. And that's where you may ask, potentially, what is holding it back, but investigations are going on, and that's very clear, and further requests, for further counts may be made. Don't forget that this is only the first stage. This is going to the pre-trial chamber. The three judges in the pre-trial chamber will make their decision. I also think it's very important to note that there's been a very serious panel of experts that has advised on this, and they're all very serious international lawyers, including some Jewish ones. And one has to distinguish between the political elements of this, potentially the timing. I think one can question the timing, and the legal evidence and the legal aspects. I think on the law, it's going to be very difficult to challenge. On jurisdiction, I assume that Israel will challenge the jurisdiction, given that it is not a state party to the ICC.
Yohann Soufi, on Gil's point about criminal intent.
Well, that's the entire point of a trial, no? It's to determine whether or not there is an intent. If the prosecutor and the member of his office have considered that there is sufficient grounds to issue an arrest warrant for war crimes and crimes against humanity, against both Israeli leaders and Hamas, it means that they consider that there is the intent by Israeli leaders also to conduct a widespread or systematic attack against the civilian population. So this idea, which is not based on any fact, which Israeli leader would have the desire to protect the civilian population, is contradicted by the prosecutor's decision.
Let's delve into, as Nomi started to do, into exactly what the prosecutors said. Mm-hmm. As Nomi was saying, a panel of 3 judges will decide, because it's very early stage here, whether to, in fact, even issue the arrest warrants and to allow the case to proceed. Both sides accused not of genocide so far, but of war crimes and crimes against humanity.
On the basis of evidence collected and examined and analysed by my office, I have reasonable grounds to believe that 3 senior leaders of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Daif, and Ismail Haniyeh, bear criminal responsibility for the following international crimes committed on the territory of Israel and the State of Palestine from at least the 7th of October 2023.
Okay, that's the Hamas side. The charge sheet accuses Netanyahu and his defense minister of, quote, collectively punishing Gaza's civilian population with bombings in populated areas and the restriction of food aid.
That starvation has caused and continues to cause deaths, malnutrition, dehydration, and profound suffering among the population. My office charges Netanyahu and Gallant as co-perpetrators and as superiors in the commission of these alleged crimes.
Does that hold up, William Julier?
Yes, first comment on what the prosecutor just said. The application for a warrant to be issued is based on reasonable grounds to believe, which is a very low test. Then when a pre-trial chamber decides whether someone must be sent for trial, it is another test, which is the substantial grounds, and it goes up. when then you get to trial. And
so why go public so early?
Served 10 years in prison and 4 years, I think, for another one, were at the end of the process considered not guilty. So trial is the last stage, and there are surprises in also the direction of people who have been remanded in custody for very long periods to be considered not guilty.
So why did the chief prosecutor go public so soon then?
I don't know if it's so soon, as it was recalled. This war has been going on for 7 months. I hear what was said on my right side. I don't share the view about victims not being equal. Victims are equal when there are victims, and then the intent is very important. And this is what you and Sophie said, which is this is the job of the court, of the prosecution, and this is what will come out of the process. And that is why it is justice that must be followed and must prevail. And the statement of the English Prime Minister, for me, is a clearly political statement. Helpful, legally speaking, does not mean anything. We're not helping or not helping. We're just carrying on with the process, and I think that is
it sounds like
that is a good thing. I mean, your question was justice, or I imagine there's politics involved.
Yeah,
but justice is needed, and usually works quite well because the process has shown that it works. And then some member states consider that there's no jurisdiction. The stance of the USA is something that can be discussed, because on one side they say, oh, good, there's been a warrant issued against the Russian leader, and then when it's regarding Israel, then they consider that ICC has not got jurisdiction, so their position is always a bit shaky, including for themselves, because they don't recognize the ICC as having any jurisdiction over their territory.
Nomi Bar-Yaakov, when you have at the same time, this fact that the case is still being built, as both you and William have said, and this use of the term unhelpful, which the panel agrees, means it's a political statement. It's because political time is not the same as judicial time. And I suppose what Rishi Sunak is alluding to is trying to get a ceasefire going.
Correct. Correct. I do think it could hinder a ceasefire. I think it will embolden both sides. I think that it's, that's why I said earlier, one has to question the legal issues. And I think there's a very serious panel of legal experts advising Karim Khan, the prosecutor, and they convened in January and they issued a report, which I have in my hand, and I can share quotes from it that are relevant to the discussion we're having. I can certainly say it's a serious report, and they've examined all the evidence that has been gathered thus far that is relevant, and concluded that there are reasonable grounds to seek a debate in the chamber, in the pre-trial chamber, on arrest warrants on different charges for Israel and for the Israeli 2 and the Hamas 3. However, one has to question the timing, because Qatar is a key negotiator in the ceasefire talks. And don't forget that there are a large number of hostages still in Gaza. There are 129 hostages. And in order for them to try to get them out, I don't think Hamas will have much incentive now. And so it will embolden both sides. Both sides reacted, meaning both the Qataris and Hamas, and meaning Hamas also the Ezzedine al-Qassam, the military wing in Gaza, the political wing in Qatar, where Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of the political bureau, has also been indicted, and in Israel. I mean, everyone is outraged. So I think one does have to ask what the motives were for issuing the request for the warrants now.
Sophie, what were the motives?
The motive to make a
statement? Go so fast, because you've heard both William and Nomi talk about it.
Well, to go so fast, I don't know. Yeah. What's the timeline? I mean, it has been 75 years of...
But this might blow up ceasefire negotiations.
Well, I think diplomats and politicians have a job, which is to ensure peace. prosecutors and judges have a different job, which is to fight impunity and ensure justice for the victim. And these are two different timelines. And I think the prosecutors today is actually delivering on its duty. I cannot say the same about, for example, American politicians.
Gil Mihaly.
First of all, consulting a panel of specialists is, I think, a first in this kind of procedure. So he did that. He was supposed to go to Israel with a team.
He went in December.
He was supposed to be in Israel this week.
No.
And they called the Israelis to say they are not going on the plane just before he went to CNN to speak. The same day was an op-ed in one of the American media signed by some of the people from the panel. So you see the mediatic political coup prepared for weeks by prosecutor Han. And in the past, sometimes things were published only when the warrants were issued. So he created another event and another space, another time for politics, and he prepared this entry in this space and time that he prepared in a very, very methodical way.
Why did he do that?
I don't know why he did that, but generally speaking, I think that most of the planet is suffering from an obsessive OCD disorder when it comes to Israel. Whenever it's Israel, it can't be just, overreacting. It's genocide. It's never genocide when you gas the Kurds. It's never genocide when you bomb the shit out of Yemen for 5 years, when people are hungry there. It's no problem. I'm not saying that Israel is perfect, but there is an obsession with Israel. The United Nations is voting on Israel time and again and time and again. Now, the gentleman just said that there was 75 years of impunity. I'm sorry. The first 19 years of impunity are on Jordan and Egypt. No one cared that Jordan and Egypt occupied all the territories that the Palestinians claim today, and they didn't even think of creating a Palestinian state. Still, even serious people talking about 75 years. And after 67...
But we're not talking about ancient history, Gil. We're talking about the fact that it's 7 months and there's no end game.
No, we are talking about an obsession. Mm-hmm. When you're obsessed with someone, you will always find something. I mean, he who didn't fault shall throw the first stone. If you pick on someone, you'll find everything you want and will be the greatest criminal in the world. But since, I'll finish by that, we must remember that international justice, we use the same word as we use for justice inside our countries. But in the international community, there's no a third party with a stick. It doesn't exist. It's a community of 194 members who are not equal, and there can't be justice in this. It's a metaphor. You don't have police in the world, and you don't have a real tribunal because you don't have a police behind it. So it's an intellectual creation, very interesting, very important, very positive. But people move from justice in Britain or in the United States to international justice as if they are just changing a scale. It's not the same thing.
Yohann Soufi?
Well, justice is justice, whether it's at the local level or the international justice or level. Justice is justice, and that's the role of... It has been recalled that no Western leaders has ever been prosecuted for international crimes. Well, it's a new world.
Since Nuremberg.
Since Nuremberg, indeed.
And just on the timeline, I think we're going a bit on the political side, even maybe on the religious side, I don't know. I mean, when you get back to legal stuff, it's actually quite clear. It's been stated that Hamas has carried out, the prosecutor states that has carried out crimes against humanity, and we all know kind of why. And I actually think that not many people are challenging this as much as on the other side, because we all know what happened. So for me, there's no huge fuss about that. There will be discussions about the rights of the Palestinians to defend themselves, etc. But what happened, I think, is actually quite clear. Sorry to be straightforward. On the other side, I'm not saying it's true, but the prosecutor says that they have gathered evidence. We're talking about law now, justice, evidence, with videos, photos, audio materials, satellite imagery, statements from perpetrator groups, etc., which shows that Israel has, that's the prosecutor, it's not me, intentionally and systematically deprived the civilian population in all parts of Gaza of objects indispensable to human survival. And this is also about starvation, meaning attacking convoys, stopping food to get in. These are very precise accusations. I don't know what they're worth. I haven't seen it. But if they have that and they believe it's evidence, I think, as Johan Soufi said, it's their job to deliver this evidence. It will be the job of these judges to decide whether it's enough or not. And if it is, justice is for all of us, including for the leaders, thanks to the ICC, because before the ICC, leaders could not be charged because they had immunity, which is also an important customary international rule of law. But this is what it's about, and we'll see. But I think that it's good that there's a window for things to be looked into.
So there's all these gray areas, and that's where it's confusing for our viewers, Nomi Bar Yaakov. France 24 has a report that's coming out showing just exactly what William described, which is militants in Israel trying to stop aid convoys from going in, other Israeli humanitarian groups which help to protect them. And you see in the report there is sparse police presence to stop these militants. Does that make the Israeli state responsible?
When you say militants, are you referring to the settlers, to the extreme settlers that
Yes.
raided? Yes. Not sure I describe them as militants. I describe them as illegal settlers personally, but it's a terminology. I think the problem...
Actually, I think these images were in southern Israel, but I'm not exactly certain.
Yeah, no, I'm certain. I haven't seen the France 24 report, so I just wanted to make sure we're talking about the same thing. But we're talking about very extreme settlers raiding trucks, going through Hebron, Al Halil on the way down to Gaza, and with impunity. I mean, no one's stopping them. You'd assume that the Israeli army, the Israeli Defense Force, will be there to ensure that the aid goes through, and that would be the job of the army, to ensure that all the aid goes through. And you have, I think that shows the division in Israel. I think it's an extreme group. It's the extreme group that is currently in government. Those are the parties of Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, who've been calling for the settlements to resettle Gaza. And I think Israel is a very divided society. I think, unfortunately, the prime minister, that Binyamin Netanyahu, has spent his entire career dividing and ruling. That too in Palestine. You know, the schism between Hamas and Fatah, the legitimate Palestinian Authority, ruling at the moment only in the West Bank because of a coup that Hamas had carried out against them. It's not, and taken over Gaza. It's partially because of this terrible policy of divide and rule. So yes, it is the responsibility of the Israeli government to rein in on these people and to protect the aid. But I don't think it is a government policy. I think that I don't think raiding the aid and ensuring the aid won't go in is government policy. So I think we just need to be very careful about that.
All right, it's not a government policy. In Israeli tabloid Ma'ariv, columnist Ben Caspit blasts the ICC case as a spectacular own goal by the chief prosecutor. But then in the piece, he pivots towards Binyamin Netanyahu, and he says the following: anyone who gets into bed with the Ben-Gvirs and Smotriches wakes up with arrest warrants. It's that simple. Gil Mihaly, you agree with that?
Yes, and it's part of the problem. On the one side, you have press, you have journalists. In Gaza, there's not even one journalist. No one can say something that doesn't please Hamas. On the one hand, you have a debate. You have people like Ben Caspit. On the other hand, you have just people who are following the line, or if they say something else, they can pay dearly.
Well, Western journalists are not being let into Gaza, and we've had the United States complain because the Associated Press's live feed in Gaza has been cut.
So Israel doesn't have 100 on 100, okay? So the Palestinians are 1 on 100. So it's like with the trucks. What's important is at the day of the incident with the truck, how many trucks did get in? Let's say there was one truck that was pillaged by settlers. How important is that if there were 499 that entered? So we can always go to these details, and you will have more details about Israel because Israel is an open society. What do we know what's going on in Gaza? They even lie about the number of deaths. We don't really know what's going on there.
Johan Sophie?
Well, that's great, because usually when there is a debate like that about facts, the best thing that humanity has invented is a trial and a judicial process to answer these facts. So I agree. You know what? About intent, about whether or not there are crimes that are being committed in Gaza. Well, let enter the ICC investigator, the human rights investigator, and then we'll assess after a trial, a fair trial. And you seem to be a really good advocate for Israel. So that's good. They will have good counsel before the ICC.
They can't afford me. They can't afford me.
And the other, I think, important part to follow up on what was said just before and on your question about liability and is the Israeli government liable for the actions of third parties or of settlers? The justice system also approaches these questions very precisely in terms of analyzing whether command superior responsibility can be upheld or not, looking into is it only omission, and is it an omission that can be criticized because you knew when you could and should have done something in order for the crimes not to take place? Or is it
the French press on this notion of non-assistance of person in danger?
Absolutely, but also that in some cases there's evidence that if direct orders were not given, it was incitement to, and all these questions are thoroughly discussed during not only the trial but the pre-trial stages. And once again, I agree. I don't know how many trucks got through, how many didn't, why they didn't, but this is what actually we want to know. And I do believe that many people have got things to say on both sides, on NGO sides, and there are people there on the ground who I guess have been interviewed already, will be again, and this is how things can make way.
On news website Politico, staff writer Jamie Detmer predicts that far from forcing a pause in the fighting, accusations of war crimes will cause Israelis to rally around their embattled prime minister for the long run. And it's certainly the case this Tuesday. We've had the opposition rallying behind him, and we've also had a lot of fighting. Fresh air strikes in Rafah, houses, shops bulldozed further north in the Jabalia refugee camp. So is it just a forever war now, Nomi Bar Yaakov?
Yes, as I said, I think that the timing is awkward. I agree that we need justice. I agree we need an investigation. Don't forget that there's also an investigation going on at the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, on genocide. The fact that I said earlier, the fact that genocide was not a count that they're seeking an arrest warrant for seriously undermines the ICJ case. So I think, the question really is the timing. This will embolden Prime Minister Netanyahu, and it will embolden Hamas. And it will also feed into the right. So whereas there were calls in Israel for elections, which you and I, Francois, have discussed on this program before, and I had said before that I think there will be a change in government, and there'll be a sort of more center government. I'm not sure after this ICC decision, I think that this will be the case. I think this feeds into the extreme right wing that includes Smotrich, it includes Ben-Gvir, it includes these illegal settlers that were raiding the truck that we discussed just now. I think this is going to feed into Netanyahu, and it strengthens him rather than weakens him domestically, which is extremely, extremely worrying, and he's becoming more dangerous by the moment.
Yeah, let me bring in you on, Sophie, on this. Based on your experience, you have it's now in the hands of this 3-judge panel. If the Israeli government did fall, if there was a change in coalition, which that was the headline, perhaps there was speculation up until Monday in this announcement, maybe, although I see Gil Maley shaking his head.
They will decide in days and weeks, and there will be no election before September or October.
Can I?
Yeah, so just, no, but if the government did change, would the judges then say, well, the charges are against Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. By the way, why Yoav Gallant? He's been one of the ones rowing with the prime minister. Why him? Why not?
Can I tell you something? I've worked now for 2 decades almost in the field of international criminal justice. Not in a single conflict I've not heard this argument to say, but that's not the right time. We are negotiating. I was in Mali, I heard that. I was in Ukraine, I heard that. And I didn't hear people saying, don't, issue an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin because that's going to, contradict the peace process efforts whatsoever. So this is never the right timing. I just think that international justice does its job on its side, and it's for politicians and diplomats, as I've said, to negotiate a peace process and a ceasefire. So far, they have not done a great job. They could have also issued a Security Council resolution. The US government has vetoed it. So let the justice does its job and its process, and politicians can actually act on their side.
And there's maybe something to add. I mean, I'm not sure how far we can believe in the deterrent effect of justice issuing warrants of arrest, but there is also the possibility to think that issuing these kinds of warrants of arrest could maybe help refrain on the ground a bit what could be happening if there are casualties, as we hear there are. I'm not going to say that thanks to these warrants against Hamas, there won't be more terrorist attacks. We know that the law does not have this power.
And that brings up a problem.
I mean, I am from day one a criminal lawyer before being an international one, and warrants issued against individuals, would they not be at such a risk of being arrested than normal people, are circulated via Interpol canals. There has been a lot of discussion about arresting or not arresting the former Sudanese head of state when he was in South Africa. And there's also the symbol, and I don't know, maybe on the ground more trucks could go through now that this has happened. No one will ever say so, but maybe sometimes
Gil Maley, you were saying
things have an effect.
That Israel is a democracy compared to many of its neighbors. Does William have a point that this outside pressure does eventually have a bearing, and that maybe some of the remarks we're hearing is bravado?
Yes. It's actually quite ironic. Most procedures were against non-democratic states. Sanctions are almost always against non-democratic states, from Cuba to Iran to Moscow. And what we hear is that those non-democratic states don't care. And they even explain that sanctions are great because they never did as good as they do since they have sanctions. So fortunately, in Israel, it's the contrary. I think people in Israel will be more inclined to vote against Netanyahu if he will be indicted. I'm not talking about
Is it, as some of Israelis have said, a mark of Cain on Israel, that it's a stain on its reputation?
Because it's a democracy, they listen to sanctions, because who are the government that don't care about sanctions? Those who have trillions of dollars and don't care that others starve. This is not the Israeli society. Okay? So the Iranians can say we don't care that people will eat onions as long as we have the guardians of the revolution well equipped. It can't work in a democracy. So in a way,
it will have an impact.
The only impact that this instance could have are on democracies.
Right. Interviewed by ABC News, Binyamin Netanyahu shrugged off concerns regarding himself and his ability to travel.
No, I'm not concerned about traveling. I'm not concerned at all about our status. I think that the prosecutor should be concerned about his status because he's really turning the ICC into a pariah institution. People are just not going to take it seriously.
The prosecutor should be concerned about his status. Yohan Soufi, is that a threat?
Let's try. I mean, I hope the French government going to invite Binyamin Netanyahu, and let's see how the system works. I believe in the system. I trust the process. I trust the French democracy, and I trust also the values that we claim we defend. So please, Mr. Netanyahu, come to Paris, come to The Hague, come to Berlin, and then let's try.
Nomi Bar Yaakov?
No, I agree. I don't think Netanyahu will risk traveling to France or The Hague or Berlin.
What about the other way around? Does that mean that Emmanuel Macron won't be going to Israel anymore?
No, I think Macron can go to Israel. I don't think there's any problem there. I think the problem is that Netanyahu won't risk getting arrested.
He's welcome.
The severity of this. I don't think that Israel wants to be. I don't think Netanyahu wants Israel to be a pariah state. I think it's already kind of, on the verge. And I don't think he was expecting this announcement to come yesterday. As Gil mentioned, they were expecting a delegation from Prosecutor Khan's office yesterday to board the plane at the time that the announcement was made, with Karim Khan expected in the country next week. So that's why I go on and on about the timing. I believe in justice. I believe in the justice system. I think that evidence has to be pursued, and it's a very serious issue. There is a political issue here, and there is a legal issue here. I think the legal evidence will be examined meticulously and extremely seriously by the three judges in the pre-tribunal. I think that will be it's a rigorous and serious process. I think Netanyahu is probably quite shocked by the decision, and it just feeds into his paranoia of being hounded. He already suffers from feeling that he is constantly being hounded, just like Donald Trump. They're both sort of, exactly the same in this regard, and other leaders who suffer from the same issue. They're constantly going on and on about how there's a witch hunt against them. And this will be proof in his mind that this is a witch hunt. And so the question is, what is he going to do about it? And unfortunately, I don't think that it's going to turn him to become more peaceful and less aggressive. I wish it were the case, but knowing the man and how he operates, I do not see that. You
don't see that happening. We heard Yohan Soufi say earlier how justice must be served. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We'll have to leave it there. I want to thank you, Yohan. I want to thank Nomi for being with us from London. Gil Meheli, William Juliet, thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.